folks, thanks for turning up. This is, we were debating whether or not to try it or not, but it looked like the snow was clearing off early enough for the roads to be ready. So I'm glad we all made it. My name's Andrew, and a little background. This fall, I was scrolling through Facebook, and one of Gary's photos appeared. I wasn't a friend on Facebook of his, so it caught me by surprise. It sort of stopped me in my tracks, and it was a wow moment, you know. And I'm now a friend on Facebook of it, but I'm seeing them just in my regular thing, I imagine. And then just about every one hits me as an oh wow, or yeah, it's I just love looking at the photos. Anyway, so tonight Gary's going to be going through this, as Jeff said. And Gary's originally from Newfoundland. Whereabouts?
Grand Falls, now Grand Falls,
okay.
Windsor.
Yeah, great. And I first came to Sackville in 1971 to attend Mount Allison music camps, and you see it worked. Nice demonstration there. He subsequently studied music at Mount A before pursuing further study in Ontario and England. He returned to Sackville and taught in the music department at Mount A for 25 years, retiring in 2019. He's been long attracted to looking at photographs, and he began making digital photos himself in 2008. Now that he's retired, he's happily devoting his time to exploring landscape photography, focusing mainly on local marshes, streams, forests, and waterfowl refuges. Although photography is mainly a hobby for him, he does his own printing and sells prints and cards, and his website, I'm sure, will be up on the screen there. So, he seems to be up at all hours of early mornings and evenings to catch the right light, I would imagine. What strikes me in his photographs is his use of light, capturing that light, and you have to be in the right place at the right time for a lot of that. But also his compositions, and using not only light but reflections, fog, clouds. They really appeal to me. So I'm really looking forward to this. And without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. I was going to talk about light and composition and fog and reflections, and now Andrew's and so I have very little.
Do it again, you'll do it.
We'll see. Anyway, thank you so much all for coming out on such a night. Thank you especially to the CNC and most especially to Andrew for inviting me to give this talk. I do so with some apprehension. As Andrew explained, I've certainly I'm used to talking in front of people because I've lectured at universities for 35 years. That was on music, however. This is the very first time I've ever spoken to a crowd about my photographs, so there's some apprehension there. And that's especially because I might be the person in the room with the least naturalist knowledge. I'm speaking to a naturalist club, and you know, it's interesting. There's a kind of, well, it's almost a cliche among landscape photographers that on their websites and in interviews, magazine articles, and so forth, they talk about, how they fell in love with nature at age 1.5 or so, and they've been roaming the fields and climbing the mountains ever since, and that's how they get into landscape photography. And they always talk about how their profound love of nature leads them to photography, and it nourishes their soul and so forth. These are almost cliches on every landscape photographer's website. It makes me feel slightly inadequate because my upbringing was such that I spent a fair bit of my time in the piano practice room and making music, not roaming the fields and so forth. Well, at least when I came to Mount A, aside from studying music, I also took a few fine arts courses and fell in love with visual art. And I also fell in love with looking at books of photographs. And so I at least have that kind of background. And that actually points out something about landscape photography, that it's actually a combination between loving nature and liking to be out in nature, and also, well, I guess loving art and wanting to take nature and produce some good visual photographic art from it. Now, what I'd like to do, how I'd like to run this talk, which is as much as possible is going to be show and tell, but I'd like to discuss some very general ideas as briefly as I can first, and then and some of that involves looking at slides, and then I have many more slides of this local region in capturing Chignecto. First of all, some general ideas, and first of that, some ideas about the experience of landscape photography, as I've experienced it and as other photographers witness too. I've got 7 points that I'd like to make as quickly as possible, then we get into the good stuff, the slides. One of the things, and I hope this perhaps resonates with you as members of the CNC, that when we're out with the camera, it's really about the experience of being out. That's where the main reward, at least ideally, comes from. And if we happen to produce a good photo from our outing, that's kind of icing on the cake. In tandem with that, one of the really intriguing rewards of being out with the camera, walking in nature, as opposed to just walking in nature without one, is that gradually we learn to see better. Because we're out looking for photographs, it sharpens our vision. And I think that has been especially important for me. My vision is really not very good. I had eye operations when I was growing up. And I don't have great vision. And my sense is that my acuity at paying attention to my visual world is perhaps not as great as it should be. So this has been wonderful for me, in fact, to teach me to see better. I mainly shoot and I think most other landscape photographers perhaps mainly shoot in 2 different ways. One is mounting the camera on a tripod, and I brought the camera and the tripod just in case there are any technical questions that I might be able to address later on. And so I quite often, maybe half the time or so, have the camera mounted on the tripod. And one of the great benefits of that is simply that it slows me down. It's a kind of contemplative photography, and as long as the light is stable and so forth, then the 10 minutes or so that it takes to set the tripod up and line up my shot and get all the settings just right, and then give that kind of satisfying click at the end, it helps one to kind of stay in the moment. And you kind of forget your troubles because you're thinking about what you're doing at the instant. That's one kind of photography. The other kind is using the camera handheld. And the benefit there is a spontaneity. If you happen to see something, you can react immediately and take the shot. And maybe the other half or so of my photography is handheld. That spontaneity, which is a good thing, it can bleed over into being frantic. Sometimes if the light is quickly changing, you think, oh my gosh, I've got to get that. And so yeah, there is a bit of franticness to it at times too. One of the other issues is, when I leave the house, have I already planned out, have I pre-visualized a particular shot that I want to take? Very seldom, in fact. For the most part, and this may resonate with you members of the CNC also, for the most part, I simply leave the house wondering what I might happen to come across. I'll probably aim myself in towards a particular place, or at least in a particular direction, and with luck, something will come up. Quite often, by the way, if I'm walking in the waterfowl park with a camera, which I've done how many hundreds of times, At first I'll think, gosh, you know, it's not great here today, I'm just not seeing anything. And then I'll see the first thing. And that will lead to the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. It almost never fails. Something that we photographers gradually learn, interestingly enough, is that seeing something lovely doesn't automatically mean that it's going to make a lovely photo. Very often we get gradually we get used to seeing something and think, oh my gosh, that's just absolutely gorgeous, but I don't see a composition there. So I'm not going to bother to try to take a photo, I'll just store it in my memory. Another thing that landscape photographers commonly find, and it's certainly been borne out by my experience, is that we take most of our best photos shooting locally. There's no doubt that perhaps 80–85% of the photos on my website, there are about 600 photos or so on my website, and about 80–85% of them are taken within 25 kilometers of where we're standing or sitting right now. The more you get used to going to the same place over and over again, the more you see in that place, and the more you can take advantage of different qualities of light and so forth. Now, I love the anticipation of going to different places as much as anybody else, but I've long since learned that my chances of coming back with really good photos from a new place, as much as I love seeing that new place, my chances of coming back with good photos are probably fairly slim, actually. And so there's that. And finally, there's the issue of honeypot sites. There are lots of places in the world that are so gorgeous, so spectacular, that landscape photographers herd to them, or they're attracted to them like bears to honey. And we call them honeypot sites. And so, you know, the slot canyons of Arizona, or just about the entire country of Iceland. More recently, the Faroe Islands. The trends develop, and somebody discovers a new place, and suddenly hundreds of photographers go there. I'm really happy that the Tantramar region is not yet, I hope never, a honeypot site. So when I'm out photographing, I'm usually either there alone or just with a few friends. So those are some general issues that I found or ideas that I found in landscape photography. I'd like now to show some slides, a fairly small selection of slides to illustrate some of the, again, general kinds of things that we think about when we actually take pictures: light, color, and composition. So I may as well see if, actually, Andrew, can you please, you know where the light switch is over there? Could you actually turn off the light? That would be great. Well, first of all, as he hits the lights, I talk about light. Light, of course, is the medium for photography. That's the tool that we make our pictures with. And as outdoor photographers, we're always working with the light that nature has given us at any particular time. One of the benefits of that is that we become more and more acutely aware and appreciative of different qualities of light: brilliant light and soft light and dull light and somber light and so forth, and what the qualities are. I find that I've long now been quite aware of the different qualities of light in the different months. You know, January feels different from December, and February will be different still. This is the kind of light that so often we landscape photographers long for. This picture at Fort Beauséjour was taken just a day and a month ago, December the 19th, at about 3:30 in the afternoon. The light was low and raking across, and absolutely spectacular light. Here's a similar picture taken in late November out in Point Dubuque. That gorgeous light shining across. It's the sort of light that we photographers really love to shine on our subjects. This is the kind of light that we very seldom take pictures in. This is in the middle of a July afternoon in the Waterfowl Park, and it's one of the few pictures, I think, successful pictures I think I've been able to make in that kind of very harsh summer light. Usually, well, I guess not not fully, but like other landscape photographers, I like shooting in the so-called golden and blue hours, before and during dawn, and during and after sunset. For me, most of my shooting takes place before and during dawn. Not so much after sunset. It's probably just our family schedule, but also I find that even though we have gorgeous sunsets, I'm sure you'll all agree, we have beautiful sunsets here very often, I have difficulty finding compositions in that direction, I must admit. I have an easier time at sunrise. So that's one of my few sunset pictures, or close to sunset pictures, looking towards Wood Point. On the other hand, I have loads of sunrise pictures here looking over the marsh or the Tantamara River and so forth. Sunrises, of course, on sunny days are always best if you have clouds to catch the color. Perhaps the most boring kind of sky, almost the most boring kind of sky we can have, is just a straight blue sky with no clouds to intervene and catch color. Here's again a similar lovely sunrise picture in the Waterfell Park. Now, one of the curious things that I think catches people by surprise about photographers is that we love cloudy days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we often prefer cloudy days to sunny ones. And the reason is because when you have that flat light, first of all, it's very stable light. It'll continue looking like that for hours, perhaps. And so again, you can practice that contemplative kind of photography very easily. Things are even better if we've had a little bit of rain, as I had here just a few months ago, shooting these autumn leaves, because the flat light and then the recent rain really brings out the color of the leaves. Notice, interestingly enough, by the way, and we'll see this in some of my woodland photography later on, that I omit the sky itself. That gray sky is really boring. And so it produces great light, but it doesn't make a great subject. And so we don't usually include the sky itself. Another, as Andrew mentioned, in fact, another thing that landscape photographers love is fog, which can produce really magical and ethereal effects. Here in the Waterfell Park a number of years ago, on a lovely July morning, quite early when it was foggy. One of the great benefits of fog is that it produces separation between the subject that you probably have in the foreground and background stuff that might get in the way if it were not hidden. And so there's as you can see in this picture, there's a pretty good sense of separation. Snowstorms can provide that separation too. And so had I been out shooting at, I don't know, very early this morning, maybe I could have gotten another shot like that, just out on the other side of the highway. Well, color. Traditionally, of course, photography was black and white, still is black and white, and was in film, and still is film. There are many really splendid photographers still using film, including landscape photographers, and still shooting in monochrome, in black and white. I don't, alas, even though I love looking at black and white pictures, I haven't done so very many myself, or at least not ones that I think of as successful. On the other hand, many more recent photographers, photography tends to go very heavy on color saturation. And that's something that I also am not so very keen on. This is one of my few fairly saturated pictures with very strong colors. I prefer, quite often, colors like this, more pastel tones, rather more muted tones, such as this picture of Silver Lake, or this one just behind the high school, the Waterfell Park, there, with pastel tones. Very often you get muted tones like this in the winter time, of course, and so winter is good for that kind of color. At the extreme, of course, in winter we get almost no color at all. This is actually a color photograph. but of course it looks like a black and white photograph because there is simply no color, or almost no color there. And that I found fine because when we have only the black and white interaction of the birch trees and the snow, it produces kind of an abstract, kind of two-dimensional effect. And finally, composition. Landscape photography, well, all photography, I guess, is about composition. Certainly landscape photography is about trying to make ordered rectangles out of the chaos of the world, to find ordered rectangles. And one of the ways we do that is by trying to find interactions among the various elements in the photograph. Be it just two elements like the moon and that spruce tree out at Fort Beausejour, or in a picture like this one, many more elements, but still arranged in such a way that things seem to harmonize and fall into a kind of unified whole there. So we're always trying to create good compositions, whether or not we have good light. Sometimes I thought that I take a few too many symmetrical photos. Although, actually, I guess when I add them up, I don't have so very, very many. I was worried there for a while, a few years ago, that I was using too much symmetry. Well, every now and then, of course, it seems warranted. And this produces a kind of minimal effect in this case, because this whole area of the photo up here is simply what we call negative space. Yet more symmetry, a very old picture of the Waterfowl Park with the old boardwalk, which was more photogenic, not as easy to walk on, but more photogenic than the new boardwalk. And yet more symmetry, those three trees put right in the middle there, taken just a few months ago. Well, I don't only shoot symmetrical compositions. We'll see a number of photos of the marsh, of course, as we go on. And one of the things we'll notice is that very often I tend to place the horizon line quite low, so that the sky takes up a good deal of the photo. It gives that sense of space, which of course is characteristic of, well, any kind of flat land, the marshes or the prairies out west would do as well. Another technique that you can use for in composition has to do with the fact that in the end, photographs are two-dimensional objects, and yet we're trying to give the illusion of three-dimensional space. A very good way to do that is to use what we call leading lines, lines that kind of lead us into the space, and curving S-curve lines are very popular among landscape photographers for that. Here's a really good example in the Cumberland Basin. Here's another example, although here you notice that the effect is partly three-dimensional, but it seems compressed somehow, because I've used a telephoto lens to kind of squash the space up. And so partly it gives a sort of two-dimensional effect. This is, by the way, is the Tantramar River. And it gives a kind of two-dimensional sense or interaction of a group of triangles slowly receding in space. And in a more extreme version of that, here again I've used a telephoto lens to shoot these autumn trees and shrubs up fairly close to Cookville, so that there's a real kind of confusion between the fact that, yes, we've got some trees receding in space, but it really looks like a kind of a decorative two-dimensional pattern. If any of you know the art of the early 20th century Austrian artist Gustav Klimt, this was from my Klimt period, which was a Thursday in October. Another element that can be used in composition are contrasts of texture. Here in a photo that I took just a few weeks ago, we have this granular snow contrasting with the the smooth ice and contrasting again both in color and in texture with the still running water. Just as photographs ultimately are two-dimensional and you're often trying to create a sense of three-dimensionality, photographs are also static, they're not going anywhere. And yet often we want to create a sense of movement inside them. And so here, a little section of the Maurice Creek, I've used a slow shutter speed so that the water gains a sense of motion in that static picture. In the same way, the cattails here gain a sense of motion by being photographed rather slowly as the wind takes them. Well, here nothing is certainly moving. The branches of that tree are going nowhere, but still there seems to be a kind of crackling sense of motion in that picture. I call this picture static because, yeah, the tree is in fact static, not going anywhere, but it also seems like static electricity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
That picture. And finally, as an element of composition, repeated patterns are another technique that we can use. Here we've got 7 trees in a windbreak all lined up. Here, on the other hand, we have 7 trees in a windbreak all lined up. Just slightly earlier in the season. So those are some of the kinds of compositional elements and light elements and color elements that you can see I tend to operate with. What I'd like to do now is turn our attention to photographs all taken within this region and show you some of the places, the kinds of subjects that I like to shoot, the places that I like to shoot in, and I hope you'll notice some of those elements of composition and light and color and so forth coming through repeatedly. So I shoot the Tantramar. If we run out of time, if it gets too late, stop me, or if you get really bored, stop me, because I've got a fair number of slides coming up. I'll try to move through them quickly. But I shoot, of course, the Tantramar area, the marsh. Like all landscape photographers, I love shooting trees and woodlands, although it has its own challenges here. And then other flora, not much fauna. The whole genre of landscape photography called intimate landscapes. And then, I think I may have left one out because I also shoot reflections, as Andrew pointed out. I have a group of reflections and interrupted reflections. And then what I call impressions, patterns, and abstracts. So let's get going. First of all, the Tantramar. I have very few photos of the salt marsh itself, the undiked marsh. I believe this is one, it at least was taken over around Fort Lawrence. And I believe there's a reclamation project going on. And I believe I was shooting it just a few months ago. Much more common for me is shooting the regular ferned marsh. This picture here, obviously a summer storm coming in, seems to contain many of the elements that we'll see in subsequent Tantramar pictures. It's got the barn. In fact, this particular barn you're going to see several times. It's one of the very few barns that, of course, is still left standing. So we've got the barn, we've got hay bales. We even have this little bridge here on the what used to be the railway track, now the NB Trail, going over the Tantramar River, but we can't see the river itself. So just about everything is there in this picture. I told you that barn would be making another appearance, and there's that same barn and you can see it from Upper Sackville. And I've stood on this little bit of land overlooking it's just past Upper Sackville, with a little bit of land kind of overlooking the marsh several times in different seasons and different kinds of light, taking that particular composition. This is one of my favorites. They're a bit symmetrical again, isn't it? There's that same barn again from a different vantage point. I'll be talking about the Tintagel Wildlife Area, which you're probably all familiar with, and this was taken out there in that those lovely sea of cattails that is out there. And that same barn yet again from yet another vantage point on the marsh. I promise I'll try not to show you that single barn too many more times. Another good example of the kind of rather pastel colors that I often favor. Oh no, okay, there's that barn again. This time with its neighbor, which is down on its roof. When I first began to photograph some of these barns several years ago, this was a second full barn. Now it's just a roof. And there we go. But certainly a lovely early summer dawn, probably late summer, early morning. And basically the same shot with some of that gorgeous marsh fog that we get. When I find out that this kind of fog is around, I very much tend to throw on my clothes really quickly and head out to try to catch it. This is a different barn. Good, good. This is out at Point of Butte. In fact, you've already seen that barn once too, 10 minutes ago or so when I was talking about light. And here in some gorgeous winter light is this barn. I have yet one more shot of almost the same thing. Again, the same barn. What I really love about that scene in behind the barn, those lovely curving lines of windbreak trees coming down. It's really a gorgeous area. No barn. Only that other cliche of our marsh fields, the hay bale. And sure, they are left out in winter for some reason. I think I took that picture in very early January a few years ago, and the hay bales were still there, abandoned, I guess. I don't know. And more hay bales, symmetrically arranged, happily this time. One of the intriguing things about shooting on the Tentamar marshes is that if you really don't want to shoot modern technology, and you want to avoid shooting those hydro pylons and so forth, good luck. Just about anywhere you point your camera, you're going to find those. And I've gotten tired of being annoyed at them, and I kind of go with them. And in fact, at one point I decided, well, if you can't beat it, you may as well take a picture of it. And so there, they formed the subject of that picture. But yeah, in a good deal of the marsh, unless you go out Goose Lake Road. If you go Goose Lake, well, that's taken on Goose Lake Road because I'm passing right under the pylons. If I keep going out Goose Lake Road towards Midgey, I finally get to a section of marsh where there are no electricity lines at all. It's not that I don't like electricity, I use it all the time. Many of the pictures that I've shown you of the marsh are kind of lush, I guess, summer pictures, but of course the marsh often looks rather bleaker, as it does here in this picture taken in late October, just in behind the old RCI towers. That's a section of that road there. And of course, in winter, back to barns, that's not the same barn, it's a different one. Just beside the High Marsh Road, I'm sure you've seen that barn that's down on its luck. It's still there, but this barn is now gone. It was there until about last year or so, and then suddenly it disappeared. So yet another one has bitten the dust. A different marsh completely now. This is the West Puck Marsh, which only has one barn left too, in fact, although we can't see it here. Photographers also love it when there's hoarfrost, and it coats everything and makes all the trees and plants look magical. We had hoarfrost about 3 weeks ago for a while. It was great to get out. Another place that I like shooting, apart from the Tentamar marshes, are the Tintamar wildlife area regions. The traditional one that we had access to, of course, is the one at Joliture, and here's a picture that I took out at Tintamar, close to Joliture, those lovely lakes that are out there. More recently, and I'm sure I'm speaking to people who already know this, more recently they've been building roads into a whole new area of the Tintamar wildlife area close to Midgey. And they've been extending those roads over the past few years. I was delighted to find out, oh my gosh, I can actually get in there and see that lovely area, which as I mentioned, is a kind of sea of cattails. It's really gorgeous, and then these long waterways in among them with scattered trees. And so the past few years, particularly the summer of 2023, I guess, I was in there a good deal shooting that in the Tintamar Wildlife Area. So I have a few photos. This is obviously a dawn photo, of course, and another one kind of emphasizing the sea of cattails. Oh, and those lovely, what are those, pond lily? Pond weed of some kind, I guess.
Some variety of pond, I'm not sure.
Whole mats of them. They're gorgeous.
Do they have sort of elongated leaves that are?
Yeah. So I don't know which species they are, but I hadn't seen them before I hit that region. But yeah, there are whole mats of them, and they're really quite lovely. Here's a shot I took. Oh gosh. This past October, I suppose, on a lovely foggy morning when the sun was just barely visible in the waterway there. And finally, I think, yet another shot of waterways and the cattails and so forth. This whole lovely line of birch trees in here, this is the bad news, it's now gone. They built in the winter of 23, 24, they built a whole new road curving right in around there, and they had to take out all the trees to do that. I was quite disappointed. Another area that I used to shoot in more than I do in the past few years is the Morris Creek. Particularly as it flows through the marsh. If you drive out Don Harper Road and kind of keep on going, you get to places where it joins the Morris Creek. And I was delighted when I discovered 5 or 6 years ago that area of the Morris Creek. This again is kind of midday July light, a kind of rare picture for me. Now, from more bad news, you may know this already too. All of these trees are gone. I don't know whether a new farmer bought the land and he's been farming corn there, but yeah, I showed up a few years ago expecting to keep on shooting this lovely bend in the Morris Creek, only to discover that it had been kind of turned into a wasteland as far as photography is concerned, at least. So yeah, it was a real disappointment to me. This tree, however, is still there, and that's good. Yeah, just another section of the Morris Creek on a lovely early summer dawn day. Finally, the Tintamar River. And so here's a photo of the Tintamar River fairly close to its mouth. On an early December morning, one of the issues, or one of the features, I suppose, that I can point out here is that, of course, it is a fairly low tide, I suppose, and in the early morning, the mud turns a glorious shades of blue and purple and so forth. That's not the last of those we've seen by any means. Well, here's a shot of the Tintamar River too. In midwinter, when the ice, all that mud has turned to ice and piled up in a kind of moonscape. So a rather odd shot of the Tintamar River. The Tintamar River, of course, runs into the Cumberland Basin, and very often I've been going to the Westcock Dyke, where, of course, there's an excellent view over the Cumberland Basin, and sometimes you arrive there at flood tide, and sometimes at ebb tide, and very often in between. And when the tide is low, and in the early morning, and actually at sunset too, yeah, the mud turns this these glorious shades of blue, and I've long since become fascinated by the patterns of fissures in the mud, and I have a fair number of pictures, which I won't show you all of them, of those fissures in the mud, the patterns of them. Here's another one. The tide is about halfway out or so, And again, a sort of rough symmetry, I guess, in how those three fissures are arranged. There's a cute little moon up there too, just barely visible. And a shot I took just, oh gosh, maybe it was in August, just the last year, when the sun does come up and hits the blue mud, then the fissures, one side of the fissures, can be gorgeously illuminated in a beautiful glowing orange. And it turns really a kind of fiery color. It's gorgeous. Slightly further afield, this is down at Peck's Cove, where once again we've got early morning blue mud.
There's a series of tracks going across.
Yes, yeah, there are lots of little birds.
But
And,
one straight line of.
Yeah. You would know the species far better than I, but yeah, there are lots of birds that, of course, scratch around in the mud. And back to the Westcock Dyke. This is the Cumberland Basin again, quite uncharacteristically with no wind at all. It's at flood tide, and there's just no wind at all. And so a minimalist picture with the sky reflected in that gorgeous, calm water. Well, those are some of the pictures that I've taken of the Tantramar. Now, trees and woodlands, as I've said, almost all landscape photographers are fascinated by shooting trees, lone trees, and also woodlands. Woodland photography, however, is often considered some of the most difficult kind of photography to pursue, because woodlands are pretty chaotic places. And again, trying to bring order there is difficult. Boy, does that ever apply to our forests. The Acadian Wabanaki forest is very, very difficult, I found, to shoot in. I've got some pictures that I've managed to take. The number of species that we have in abundance here is fairly limited too. There's a lot of spruce and balsam fir, which I must admit I haven't usually found all that photogenic. And a lot of birch, which I do find photogenic in just about all seasons. And so here's out beside the highway, one of the stands of birch at springtime. I'm sure in fact I know that stand of birch now looks, of course, very different, because it's been viciously attacked by the bronze birch borer, and so a lot of those trees are, alas, dead. But I like the really tall, spindly shapes in that shot. It's actually on my living room wall, a print of that. Of course, birch in autumn is in the Waterfell Park, with a kind of mixture of warm colors and cool, rather bluish shadows. And birch in winter, again, just the other side of the highway, when only about a month ago, when we had an early snowfall. Lone trees. Again, well, the number of lone trees, just a tree sitting in the middle of a field with nothing around it, I haven't found loads of them here. And so when I find one, it's precious. This one is still is in the middle of Beach Hill, and the field at Beach Hill. And it's a birch tree, and I think I have something like either 4, maybe even 5 pictures of it, one after the other. Here in the early morning with the sun right on the back of it. Here in the middle of a snowstorm. And the snowstorm, again, helping to separate that tree from those background trees. One of the really lovely things about this tree, of course, is that gorgeous symmetry. It's a pretty symmetrical tree, once again. And I take advantage of that symmetry again to shoot it in fog. Once again, creating a lovely separation, and again, a good minimalist shot, loads of negative space in the entire bottom half of the picture. And finally, an early spring picture. I love shooting trees in early spring when the leaves have come out. They're that gorgeous light yellowish green color. And you notice also they're small enough so that they don't obscure the kind of skeletal structure of the tree. Landscape photographers love to see the skeletal structure of trees. So we like shooting them in late fall and winter, in fact, and early spring before they get up, before the leaves cover everything over. Once again, alas, that tree now has a huge broken branch, I think, and the symmetry, for photographic purposes at least, has been spoiled. It's still certainly there, thriving. Another tree that, again, alas, is gone. This was a real standout tree in the middle of the West Marsh, and over a few years, I took a number of shots of it against, gorgeous early morning skies and so forth. And then I showed up, I think, summer before last, and there it was, gone. So that, alas, isn't to be shot anymore. I said I don't shoot spruce trees very much. You've already seen one shot of this spruce tree with the interacting with the moon. Here's an earlier shot that I took a number of Julys ago, in the middle of July. And so that's the July moon. How I tend to shoot the moon is that I tend to shoot, if I'm trying to shoot basically the full moon, I wait until about a day or two after full moon, and then I know that the moon is going to be setting late after the sun comes up. And so I'm kind of balancing how much light is coming from, well, the ambient light from the sun, and how bright the moon is, so that I can get the moon at about the proper brightness. The moon is rather difficult to shoot, in fact, at proper brightness. And so I found that this is a good approach for being able to get some of the details, and so the moon doesn't just look like a white blob. Missing from this photo are the clouds of mosquitoes that were attacking me at the time. In fact, there were so many mosquitoes that they did actually show up in the photo. This is why we have Photoshop to get rid of the mosquitoes. Very different tree. This, of course, is that wonderful copper beech just in front of the Civic Center. A pretty magnificent tree. And I'm more or less lying on my back or so, kind of looking up so that I can shoot the tree itself. Again, it's early spring, so we can still see the structure of the tree. The leaves haven't completely covered it. And I'm shooting up so that all the surrounding buildings and so forth are not going to be in the shot. I've done exactly the same thing with this oak tree that I came across just a few months ago in the Sackville Cemetery. And once again, we can still see all the branching structure of the tree with the autumn leaves around it. Now, those are single trees. When we come to shoot woodlands, as I say, it's a tough task at the best of times because of the chaotic structure of woodlands. Many of the British photographers I follow, gosh, those guys have it easy because they tend to wait until they get a good thick fog, and then they go out into their kind of forest, which is much more open and has big gnarly oak trees and so forth. And the fog comes right in among the trees and provides that wonderful separation that they're looking for. In all the times I've tried, this is the one photo where I found fog actually in among the thick trees, the thick forests that we have. This is just opposite Truman's Blueberry Farm, a small stand of birch, and yeah, there's actual fog in there. That's amazing. It's almost, even when we get fog elsewhere, you go in the middle of the woods and it's just not there. It's curious. Usually then, what I've found is that I've had to go to some place like the Tantramara Door Club trails so that I'm not right in the middle of the trees themselves where things are just too thick to be able to shoot, but I'm on a path. And then there's a bit of open ground and I can actually see the trees. Once again, you notice I'm always leaving out the sky here so we can focus just on the trees. So I have a number of photos taken in various bits of the paths at the Tantramara Door Club lands. That one here done in April. This one also in April. This is actually path, but it's been turned temporarily into a pond by snow melt in April. And this is also in April, the last April, when we had a kind of early spring snow squall that lasted only an hour and a half or so. Thankfully, I happened to be where I could shoot those trees. Again, another section of the path, this time in, or one of those paths, the Ogden Brook path. And you'll probably recognize that little bridge going over the brook. Shot in autumn. Again, there's enough space that I can actually shoot the trees. Another technique is to actually get just on the edge of the forest. So I'm actually in a clearing here, and I'm shooting just the border of the forest. Again, just a few months ago, I took that picture. And again, on the path, this was shot in early January a few years ago after a big snowstorm. Photographers like to be proud of pictures, even if they're not good pictures. We're proud of them if we've put a lot of work into getting them. And I won't tell you how far I trudged in snow up to here to get. I will tell you how far I trudged in to get that shot. So I think it's a good shot just because it hurt getting it.
You didn't have snowshoes.
I didn't back at the time, and I didn't have snowshoes for this shot either, which was actually the 23rd of March, would you believe it? A very late snowstorm, and I trudged even further into the Amherst Bird Sanctuary to shoot this little bit of path. It's probably familiar with many of you. This is another shot that cannot be taken now because Hurricane Fiona came through later, and one or two of these trees have been destroyed. Okay, quickly on to other flora and fauna if you haven't had enough yet. Photographers always begin by shooting flowers because they're pretty, kind of colorful. So I have a few pictures of flowers here, more on my website. Trilliums, of course, at the Tantamar area. Some bunchberry arranged in a nice oval shape. That was nice of them. A starflower, again, just beside Walker Road, the starflower was, and so dust from the road had got all over the leaves. And yeah, maybe it's slightly unnatural having dust all over it, but yet I thought it looked gorgeous, the pattern of the dust on the leaves. And the starflower itself, it's just gorgeous, beautiful flower. Some Dane's rocket just on the edge of the waterfowl park with a lovely canopy of maple leaves over them. It's about mid-June or so that those flower. And of course, out of the Tinchmar Wildlife Area close to Midgey, there are lots of vines, as we'll see, that cover those roads that have been built in the Tinchmar Wildlife Area, just covered in vines, and including bindweed. In the waterfowl park, again, a lovely shad bush. Shad bushes look so gorgeous just at the point when they're flowering and have those lovely red leaves before all of that goes away and they become rather nondescript green plants. I think this is definitely not a native species, a redbud tree. A few redbud trees have been planted just on back of the music conservatory where I worked for 25 years. And I used to love watching them in late May, very early June, break out in those lovely pinkish purple small flowers attached directly to the branches. And those small flowers gradually get replaced by leaves. And so I managed to catch this one, again, lying on my back, pointing the camera straight up at a white sky. Managed to catch this one just as the changeover was happening between the flowers and the leaves. Another time when it's great to get out is when we have one of those very still frosts in November, early December, and the rime kind of coats the leaves and flowers and remaining flowers and so forth. And so I was happy to be able to catch that lovely kind of contrast of green and red, very Christmassy. Another thing that I look for every summer when I'm walking in the Waterfall Park, especially, but also in the Tachimara Door Club area, are arrangements of ferns, because of course they tend to grow in bunches, and I'm always looking for neat arrangements of them, how they interact with each other. And every now and then, if I get really lucky, then I come upon a neat arrangement. And this one is just from this past summer. If you catch them early enough too, this is probably what, early mid-June or so. They're pretty fresh and they haven't been too eaten by various insects.
So there are at least 2 species in there, I gather?
I presume, are there? Yeah. Does those look different from
Yeah.
those?
Mm.
Yeah. The Waterfall Park certainly has several species of ferns. So, and again, I'm not being a naturalist, I'm really bad at identifying species. I think I know a cinnamon fern when I see one, or at least when it's got its cinnamon. Oh, and there's another one, taken a few years previously. Not quite as nice as the other one. The reeds in Silver Lake are also a pretty good subject, and we'll see a few of those as we go by. There's a sense of kind of stillness and peace about them, especially when there's fog on back of them. And also some grasses that survive during the winter. I think this shot was probably taken in January, but the grasses have been around. This is fairly close to Midgey again. The grasses have been around since the previous summer. My eyesight is terrible. I just simply can't see birds. My patience is terrible. I can't wait around for birds to do things. And my wife won't let me buy an $8,000 lens. I don't know why. And so for all of those good reasons, I really don't shoot birds much. But I happened to, a number of years ago, be in the right place when a whole group of yellowlegs was kind of being reflected by very still water in the Waterfall Park. You folks, again, you would know a good deal more about this. My sense is that the yellowlegs are just not nearly as abundant as they used to be several years ago. And neither is the water as reflective in the summertime as it used to be several years ago. So I don't know if a shot like this is any longer possible in the Waterfall Park. I had to show you a duck. And this duck is surrounded by a lovely kind of circular pattern, which is why I quite like that. And a group of geese who are obviously being paid by Nike to fly in that formation. I was happy to catch them at exactly the right second. And that's, I think, that's it for my bird photography. Pretty well it. Well, I mentioned that a whole type of landscape photography that has gradually grown up is what we call intimate landscapes, where you're focusing just on small details. We've seen some of those before, and I have a section of them. I'm going to begin with 4 different shots of exactly the same few saplings. These are saplings growing beside one of Sackville's reservoirs. And I came across them on a day in November and thought, hey, there's a neat composition there, particularly the contrast between the upright saplings and the pattern in the water on back of them. And you'll notice it's that pattern that changes. When I returned a few days later, it now looked like that. The water with this lovely bluish and some green tones up there with the same saplings in the foreground. And then on a different day, it looked like this, with a combination of blue and gold in the background water. And then I also came back the following spring, and the blue and gold was still there, colors in the water, but now we had leaves on those trees. So I think it forms kind of a nice sequence of exactly the same subject. A pretty recent shot. Again, in intimate photography, you're very often, leaves are certainly a good subject for intimate photography. You're focusing on just a few branches simply a few leaves. We had an early snowstorm about a month ago, and just down the road from me was this bush or small tree or whatever, which was, I guess, marcescent. Its leaves were still around in the early winter. And so a nice contrast between the cool color of the snow and the warm color of the leaves. Even closer to my home, in fact in my backyard, is this shot that I took also in early December. We have a few maple trees in our backyard, and I happened to notice when I was playing with one of the dogs that suddenly the dark, rather leathery maple leaves from one of the maples had been, well, lighted on by a much lighter leaf from one of the other maples. And I thought, gosh, there's a great composition there. So I ran to get my camera very quickly. I love that sort of dark, those dark sort of, again, leathery tones in those background leaves. Here, this is actually at the Tintamara Wildlife Area in Jolicoeur, once again, a detail of pond lilies and reeds kind of interfering with each other. Intimate landscape photography often approaches or tries to approach abstraction. And that's one of its intriguing features, and we'll see that as we go along too. In the other Tintamara Wildlife Area, the one out by Midgey, I mentioned that the roads that they've built are just covered in summer by creeping vines, just lying along the road. And there seem to be mainly just a few different types. Arrowroot seems to be one of them. And whatever this plant is with these lovely heart-shaped leaves is another type of vine. And obviously those leaves turn gorgeous colors in the fall. And so a sort of study of those colors. Here more, again, exactly the same group of vines, now very thick, and on a morning when one of those frosts had set in. So I thought the combination of those lovely red vines and the icy leaves produced a really neat, again, abstract pattern effect. As Andrew mentioned, I love shooting reflections, and I especially love shooting interrupted reflections where the reflection is incomplete because things are in the way, and also distorted reflections. So I have some examples. Well, this is a complete reflection. A small spring pond in the middle of the forest that I came across a few years ago. And you can see, again, a kind of confusion between the leaves that are underneath the water here and the reflection of the trees being reflected in the water. And I love that kind of abstract confusion. Again, we love to boast about how much trouble we took to get a picture. I had to go back 4 times, walking a kilometer each time, I'll tell you, to get to that pond. And the first 3 times I was just not happy with the result. I thought, surely, I know there's a great picture there. I can do better. On the 4th time, I was successful. Much simpler, just a reflection on the water. Just a distortion of some birch leaves in the waterfowl park. I love going to the waterfowl park in April is a good time. I love pointing my lens down into the water. It's a good time to get reflections. Here's a good example of I guess I could call it interrupted reflections because we've got the actual leaves here in the fall, and then below those leaves the surface of the water with the reflection of the birch trees and those same leaves, in fact. And the same thing again in spring, early spring birch leaves, and below those leaves the reflection of the water and the reflection of those same leaves. There's one particular spot on the boardwalk that I always stop and check to see how the reflections are looking there. Out at Silver Lake, the reflections, and this time being interrupted, or I suppose you could say, by some of the reeds growing in the lake. That was a lovely pinkish purple sunrise. And here's I guess it was January when we had a slight snow melt, or slight ice melt, pardon me, maybe 2 years ago. It gave this lovely, slightly distorted reflection of the tree and the cattails below it. Now, what I usually do is I show that. I actually turn the picture upside down so that the tree is right side up, and I think it produces a really neat result. Now you can tell it's easily that it's a distorted tree. I don't turn this one upside down. This is how it actually looked. Again, a distorted image of the trees, but interrupted by these sections of ice, both above and below. Again, that shot was taken only about a month ago or so. This one's a little bit older, and once again, interrupted reflections, this time by some ice and snow, and we had a melting phase just before that. On a single morning, I was able to get 3 or 4 very different shots, but all of them of this kind of type. Well, some of the pictures we've already seen are minimalistic with just very little in the picture, and I want to show you a small selection of the kind of minimalism that I really like to shoot. Winter is a very good time for shooting minimalism, as we'll see. Well, there it is. The kind of hay bale shots that we've had before, but this time in the winter. Again, negative space is a big aspect of minimalism, where there's very little in the picture taking up the available space. Here's a different kind of negative space, both above and below, I guess, and also a slightly skewed symmetry between those elements entering from both sides, and that weird grass that's right at the boat launch every year at Silver Lake. I've certainly taken pictures with that bed of grass a number of times. Happily, there was fog obscuring the back shore, or there wouldn't have been any shot. Yeah, the reeds in Silver Lake make, especially on foggy days, they make for some good minimal shots. And here's a really minimal shot with very, very little in it. Just this small group of reeds in the lower left. The risen sun here, which we can make out its disk just barely, and we can also make out its disk in the reflection. It's one of my favorite minimal shots. Very lucky that day that the conditions were right. Another shot with very little in it at Silver Lake. We can make out the shoreline just barely, and a solitary bird flying low over the water.
Do you remember what kind of bird it was?
I think it was a gull, but I could be wrong. He was moving away from me very quickly, and I had to get that shot now. I talked
worried about the bird.
I talked about frantic photography before. This is a really good example because he was gone very quickly, and I happened to catch him just before, happily with a quick enough shutter speed. Usually, if I see a bird really quickly, I'm shooting at a 30th of a second,
right.
And you can't shoot birds at a 30th of a second. It doesn't work, and so yeah. A different kind of, slightly different kind of minimalism, good winter minimalism. This is a small patch of ice with a lovely center line there, so it's nicely symmetrical, but the symmetry is disturbed by that very differently colored leaf that I just happened to see there. Again, a leaf, this time looking straight down the boardwalk in the waterfowl park with a very long cast shadow. Winter, as I mentioned, is a great time for minimalism, partly because the snow covers up a whole host of distracting elements on the ground. And so now you can much more easily focus on just single things. So just about a month, well, a little over a month ago, I guess, a rather delicate dance of some grasses sticking out of the snow. And here, actually, in the quarry that's gradually being turned into something of a park, I guess, in Sackville, a few years ago, the afternoon January sun casting a shadow on the snow. And finally, my final section of some rather more abstract pictures. It might seem curious for landscape photographers also to like abstract, but we kind of veer towards them, particularly as we're shooting intimate landscapes. So I have a few techniques, I guess, that I use to get what I call impressions and patterns. One of them is what we call intentional camera movement. We use a fairly slow shutter speed, and as the camera shutter is open, we move the camera so that it intentionally blurs the image. Here, actually, this is out at the Bouctouche Dunes a few years ago. I kind of panned across while taking a slow picture, and it was a lovely evening. We had gorgeous evening light there, and I think this is still gorgeous evening light.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't have the actual detailed image anymore.
Did you do that handheld, or did you have it
Yes,
on a
yeah.
tripod?
I guess doing that kind of shot you could do on a tripod, particularly if you have something like a gimbal mount or something like that. But no, I tend to do those handheld. Usually intentional camera. I shouldn't say this. I can think of a whole type of intentional camera movement which really requires a tripod.
Okay.
I haven't done that much, I must admit. Yeah, but so usually I'm just moving. I'm setting the shutter speed to a fifth of a second, somewhere around there perhaps, and then moving.
No, but you have to be careful to keep it level, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
if you're
why-
going sideways like that, yes.
Because
Yeah.
you don't want to.
Yeah, that's right. You only produce a very
kinds of-
different result.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got kind of a wavy image. It's always fun. One of the interesting things, I guess, about intentional camera movement shots is that you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you always take 20, 30 or so of these, and then you think, okay, there's a good one. Okay, the other 29 are garbage, but that one actually worked. And so, yeah. If you move the camera up and down, or usually up for me, then particularly if you're pointing it at trees, then you turn the trees into columns. Well, more recently, what I like to do is to move the camera just a tiny bit instead of a lot, so that we still have a recognizable image. This is obviously a grove of birch trees in spring, but made slightly impressionistic by.
I don't catch the movement.
No, it's very difficult to notice that it's actual movement, isn't it? But these things have been just ever so slightly kind of washy.
Huh.
So yeah.
A little blurry.
Yeah, and again, you really have to experiment, kind of balancing out the shutter speed against how much you want to move. If you find yourself moving too much, then increase the shutter speed a little bit, and you'll get less blur. So there's one example. Here is another one taken just this past summer. I just saw a section of marsh fence with moving the camera just a tiny bit. So it produces a rather neat impressionistic.
Now, what was that last movement? Was that vertically or horizontally?
That was vertical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just doing that, just a tiny bit. Here's a seemingly completely different effect. In this case, these are cattails in the waterfowl park, and they were blowing in the wind while I was doing a vertical motion. And so there was kind of two sorts of movement there. I really liked the result. I don't know how many of you perhaps know some of the art produced in Italy just before World War I, the so-called Futurist movement. And that really reminds me of the Futurist painting. And so I really liked the result. Again, I threw away the other 10 that produced not so good results. Well, this is an intentional camera motion. I guess it's water motion. Just about a month ago, I pointed my lens straight down into the Ogden Brook, flowing water, and caught leaves that had already been lying there for a few months or so, and the water flowing over the leaves seemed to produce a kind of, again, rather impressionistic effect, rather unclear, slightly washy effect. If anybody's interested in the technique, by the way, I had to use a polarizing filter in order to get rid of the surface of the water, any reflections on the surface of the water. Back in the waterfowl park, again in April, I just love pointing my lens down into the water, and any kind of ripples in the water can produce abstract effects. I call this picture quicksilver because it just sort of looks like quicksilver to me, like mercury. And another similar effect of reflections on the water producing a kind of abstract effect. I was thinking of offering a free bottle of wine to anybody who could tell me what that's a reflection of.
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. It's actually one of those the back of one of those highway signs just beside the waterfowl park. And the back of it was reflecting in a bit of water. And if you stand on the bridge as you go towards that new section of the waterfowl park.
Why the 3 bars?
Oh, those are, it's the back of the sign. And so those are steel bars that kind of help to hold up the sign.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Oh my goodness.
lovely psychedelic, those of us who were young people in the 60s used to like that kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah, far the groovy. I think you could call it groovy. Yeah. A few more kind of interrupted reflections, I suppose. A pattern formed again on the ice in the waterfowl park with bits of snow scattered around it, wind-blown patterns of snow scattered around it, and gradually kind of moving towards gold here and contrasting with the blue of the snow. Ice bubbles are always a good, always produce good abstract effects in the winter time. And here I promised my very last slide. This is actually a section of tree, again in the waterfowl park. It's a dead tree in the waterfowl park, and I was interested in the different textures between this section here and the smooth bit of here. And also, one of the really intriguing things about abstract pictures, of course, is that you can put your own interpretation. You can see something in there, and I think this is a guy's head. I think it's rather too close to a bear's head. So, anyway, I call it embrace. And I don't know, it seems to speak of that. Well, that is essentially it. Here is my website address. I also have some cards in my bag, which I must dig out if anybody wants to take one of my cards. Yes, please. Thanks, Andrew. Aside from that, I also have brought a few boxes of prints. I do my own printing. I have a very good photo printer, so I do my own printing, and I sell prints too. So I have a whole bunch of prints there. You can see the kind of thing that I do. You'll recognize many of the pictures, but you can see what they look like when they're actually printed. And I brought a few framed prints too, because I also sell prints framed. And just very, very quickly, I tend to sell these in 2 different sizes because I get the frames from Moncton. And so here is 16 by 20, and this one is matted. I can do mats. And this one is 12, but you've seen those ferns. You thought it might turn them right side up. They look so much better right side up. And this one is unmatted, but with a large white border around it. So you can see the kind of thing that I tend to sell. I can also sell them unframed and unmatted, in which case, very quickly what you get is something like, well, I have loads of them here. here are 16 by 20s, again with large borders around them. And so the pictures tend to look like, I'll get you to hold these Andrew, it's okay. You've seen that picture before. You've seen this picture before. You haven't seen this picture before. A fairly colorful one. And so forth. It's the kind of printing I do. So if anybody's interested, afterwards you can take a look at these. Are there any questions, comments?
I have a question about shutter speed when you're doing the moving.
Okay, yes.
Up and down,
Yeah.
what shutter speed do you, what range would it?
Usually it's about anywhere from a fifth to a tenth of a second or so, because I don't want the shutter speed to be so slow that all kinds of garbage is, the movement is going to take place. So it has to be fairly fast. So I put the camera on manual so that I can control the shutter speed exactly as I want. And then again, mess around with it a bit. If for the amount of movement that I'm making, I'm getting too much movement, then, make the shutter speed a bit faster. So, and of course, we tend to do the same thing when we're shooting waterfalls. We've probably got a quarter of a second or so very often works for many waterfalls to give just enough movement in the water. So it's one of the fun things you can do with shutter speeds.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other, yes?
Do you adjust the colors afterwards in your computer or darkroom?
Yeah, that's an interesting technical question. If you shoot pictures with your phone, many of us take pictures with our phones, and the phone spits out a JPEG image.
Yeah.
And of course, that image has already been processed,
Right,
about six
yeah,
levels
yeah.
of processing inside the phone. Most of us photographers shoot raw. And so we're taking raw files inside the computer. Those are really boring looking files when we first see them. They're pretty drab and dull. And so you're always making adjustments to them. And then you're deciding, okay, how much adjustment do I want to make? I hope you find most of my pictures look pretty realistic. I try to make them look artistic, and sometimes art demands that you improve nature a little bit. Nature's not all that good to begin with.
Right.
So yeah, I tend to make minimal adjustments if possible, but you're always making some adjustments, certainly to raw images. Yeah. Any other questions?
I noticed the format that you end up producing is quite variable. Do you have different lenses, or do you just crop to the composition?
It's cropping. My camera turns out a 3:2 ratio, and many of the pictures there are 3:2. And then I tend to use only a few different ratios: 3:2, 5:4, which of course is a very standard ratio 8:10. And it's also a standard ratio for large format photography. Quite often. Well, again, those cameras are 4:5 or 8:10. And when I shoot portrait mode, I usually shoot 4:5 format. And then you will have seen a few photos 16:9, kind of television format these days, and a few rather more panoramic, which is 15:6, so 2.5:1, which gives I think a nice kind of rather panoramic feeling. But I tend to hold to those set simple ratios. But the camera itself natively turns out 3:2.
Okay, and then during processing, you will
I can do that
crop to
during
that?
Yeah, well, I can do it during processing. I can also, my camera, I can set it to 3:2, 4:5, 1:1, 16:9. I think those are the ones it will go to. And I probably shouldn't do this, but I tend to do that in camera. The problem with when you do that using a Nikon camera, other brands don't do this, but the Nikon camera throws away those pixels that you're not
Oh,
using.
no.
Which means that if you change your mind later
Gone.
on, it's too late. Many other camera manufacturers don't do that. And so, of course, what I should really do is see how it looks in 4x5,
Yes.
but then just go back to 3:2 to get all the pixels just
Yeah.
in case I change my mind later on. Yeah. As it is, I have to live with what I get, which is not a bad thing. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, in terms of photographing the marsh, do you find it different? I know you said you mainly photograph here where you're in the area, but if you've gone other places, like even PI where the soil is so red, or
Yeah.
more Ontario or something, is photography different here than there? Or is
I
it
don't
just
know
that
whether
you know
photography
this
is
place
different
better?
here. Again, what I have found, is when I've gone to other places, I was in PEI last summer,
Yeah.
and for 2 or 3 days, and happily came away with 3 or 4 good shots. I think I'm getting better at it, but yeah, that's a really neat thing. The landscape looks different, and so it's kind of new and exciting to shoot there. Almost one of the few other places that I've shot in the past decade or so was about a little over a week. My wife and I spent in England, and I was shooting in the Lake District for 4 days, and then over on the East Coast in Whitby for about 4 days, and 4 days, and I take 20 pounds of camera gear with me, and I looked so professional doing what I was doing, and I came back with mostly trash. I think there are still 7 photos in my collection that were worth keeping at all. Just, and so often the other photos, when you come back from a new place, they look like postcard shots.
Yeah.
And it's odd that that's the case. I think I'm getting better at not doing that, but yeah.
Now, have you several lenses for the camera body?
Only 2 these days. I guess the most lenses I ever had was 4, and these days what I have in lens numbers are confusing unless you're kind of into it. But this kind of camera, a regular looking picture would be 50 millimeters, and anything less than 50 millimeters is wide angle, and then anything greater than 50 millimeters is more and more telephoto. And the 2 kinds of zoom lenses that photographers usually have are 24 to 70 and then 70 to 200. And but I found this lens here, which is a very good one, pretty jolly good lens, and it's a 24 to 200. So it covers the entire range, and then I have another wide angle lens, an older wide angle lens, which is 16 to 35 millimeters. I don't use that so very much, that wide, much wide angle. It's kind of specialist lens. So this lens is on my camera just 99% of the time. I used to really hate having to change lenses in the middle of winter when it's -10 and there's a wind blowing, and you think, just kill me now. So I just never have to change lenses, which means dirt doesn't get into the camera either,
That's the
which is
thing.
great.
Or if you're on a cliff in the Arctic and you put one lens down and change lenses, and it rolls off.
And it would, yes, yeah.
So there is a disadvantage to having
Yes,
multiple
it's not a
lenses.
great
That's
thing. Traditionally, again, a lens that covers that wide a range, 24 to 200, you immediately think, oh, okay, what are the compromises being made? What's wrong with this lens? The good news, I suppose, is that when Nikon came out with this design of so-called mirrorless camera about, 5-6 years ago or so, their engineers, God bless the Nikon engineers, they made some really, really good choices in how they were going to design these cameras, and that allowed them to design very high quality lenses, any Nikon lenses for that they've come out with in the past 6 years are simply wonderful. Now, some are better than others, but even this is essentially a kind of consumer level lens, not a professional. But it's fine. It's a really good lens. Yeah. And so when I tested it against the professional lenses that I had before, older professional lenses, I actually did some tests. And it was of course. Yeah. So yeah, it's great. Sorry, that was tech talk.
No, that's it.
My older brother used to call it talking f-stops. Photographers just love to talk f-stops. It's really boring. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for listening at such length.